Today, we are going to be discussing the topic of God, Satan, and politics. In the first reading for today, written by Fan Hao Ni, Ni writes that a belief in supernatural evils are very prevalent among religions, although that there is this widespread belief in things like hell, Satan, demons, etc. You would think that this would be the subject of more sociological interest, given the fact that human beings assign so much meaning and importance to these belief systems. However, sociologists don't really know all that much about either the social determinants of these belief systems, nor the political implications of these beliefs. Ni, in this article in Social Currents, finds that there is the stronger a belief in demons or evil spirits is associated with negative views toward Joe Biden, and in contrast, such beliefs he finds, predict support for Donald Trump. Ni goes on to say that in-group and out-group divides and rivalries can be punctuated by perspectives of spiritual warfare between God and Satan, or heaven and hell. This spiritual warfare perspective makes the case that the world can be understood in these binaries of good versus evil. Like I said, these beliefs in supernatural evils are quite widespread in the United States. 57% of Americans believe in the devil, 54% believe in hell, and 48% in demons. It could therefore be surmised that just like we would study belief in God or religious identification and the sociological and political relevance of these matters, one could also say that given how widespread a belief in demons or Satan is, this is also a belief system worthy of the sociological attention. So, those who adhere to the spiritual warfare perspective might be more punitive on views on social issues, such as capital punishment and severe criminal sentencing. Policy differences are not just policy differences anymore. If one has adopted the spiritual warfare perspective, instead, it is not just a disagreement as to how policy decisions should be made, but rather that these disagreements, these rivalries, turn into serious transgressions against God. Social problems are not only within this world, within the perspective that is punctuated by spiritual warfare, but rather take on a much greater spiritual cosmic weight. To establish that an in-group is pure, a community must expunge perceived sin, that being those who are perceived as violating moral and spiritual order. From this perspective, one could easily surmise how moral panics can occur if an outgroup enters within the community and members of that outgroup are perceived as being demonic, or on the side of demons at least, potentially harmful to the community in not only social but also spiritual terms, which are intertwined from the spiritual warfare perspective. Supernatural evil is thus linked to certain groups and actions which punctuate the in-group and out-group rivalries, and this includes not only intergroup relations, but also our conceptions of political leadership. So some Christians have their political views shaped by this spiritual warfare perspective. Outgroups, let's say immigrants, for example, are thus literally demonized, not in the sort of symbolic way in which we use the word demonization, but rather that they are acting in accordance with demonic intentions, or are being used by demons. Politicians who put forth policies that, let's say, favor immigrants, an outgroup perceived to be not aligned with the spiritual or moral order of the quote-unquote in-group. Politicians who support such policies are thus perceived as being demonic themselves. One example that the author turns to is from Nikki Haley, who is the former governor of South Carolina and 2024 presidential candidate, though unsuccessful for the GOP. Said that Biden is Satan's liar who comes from, quote, the depths of hell. The in-group is thus seen as spiritual warriors within the spiritual warfare perspective, and they are fighting on the side of God. Again, it is not a matter of mere policy disagreement, but rather a much greater fight between God and Satan. For some, the authors say, Trump's administration was perceived as a sort of divine invasion within this demonic territory that characterizes the political field. If Trump is perceived as the leader of the pure in-group, a belief in supernatural evils may intensify support for him because it gives it a greater urgency within this spiritual cosmic crisis that manifests itself into political tensions. By contrast, of course, this perspective intensifies hatred for the political opponent because the political opponent is perceived as a person who is on the side of Satan. Okay, so turning to the next reading by Froese and Bader, they use survey data to examine how images of God, that's conceptions of God, the type of God we think of when we believe in God, how the various conceptions of God relate to political ideology in 7 Western countries. They provide a quote from us from a famous sociologist, Clifford Geertz, who writes, "The notion that religion tunes human actions to an envisaged cosmic order and projects images of cosmic order onto the plane of existence is hardly novel. But it is hardly investigated either, so that we have very little idea of how, in empirical terms, the particular miracle is accomplished." Social scientists have long studied the relationship between religious affiliation and political ideology, but there isn't much research on images of God, meaning how the person thinks about God, what they have in their head when they think about God, the God that they believe in, and how those different conceptions lead to different predictions of their political ideology. Belief in God is very high in the United States compared to most other Western countries, and there are some aspects of American religiosity that Froese and Bader show to be particular to the U.S. in comparison to the other countries that they tested. The authors refer to a sociologist, James Hunter, and his concept of culture wars. To understand culture wars, one has to understand the fact that people have fundamentally different conceptions of reality, which lead to varying social and moral values. And these divides, Hunter says, are essentially religious in nature. The central point of these divides revolves around differing sources of moral authority, whereas Orthodox Americans believe in transcendent moral authority. Progressives tend to view morality as being more subjective. So previous research shows that it is not the only type of moral authority. It is not only the type of moral authority, let's say transcendent as opposed to subjective, that affects political and social views, but the type of God conceived of as well. Americans with more maternal and gracious conceptions of God, for example, will be progressive, whereas those who have, let's say, a less forgiving and more strict type of God in mind when they think of God, an authoritative God, when they think of the God that they believe in, they will tend to be more conservatives. Americans view God as being more involved in human affairs and more authoritative than the other countries analyzed. This is the aspect of American exceptionalism, exceptionalism of type of religiosity that Froese and Bader take note of. Those who believe in this sort of involved, active, authoritative God are more likely to be moral absolutists on issues of sex and abortion. Also, capital punishment tends to be more likely supported by those who have involved an authoritative God. They're more likely to be punitive in their views on criminal punishment. And those who conceive of God in such a way tend to hold very strict moral attitudes.